Preventing landlords from doing background checks on tenants will reduce the availability of rental housing. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over a topic that I've covered before in a past video, and it's all about restrictions that local governments are trying to put on landlords from doing tenant background checks. But before I get into that article, go ahead, hit that like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and I'll work to keep bringing you great articles about the eviction moratorium and other news that's of interest to landlords. So, this article, it comes to us from WashingtonPolicy.org, and it says, restrictions on tenant background checks will reduce rental home availability. Yeah, and I personally believe that every single, thing that they do that's supposedly tenant friendly, that's supposedly going to help tenants, is actually hurting tenants in the long run, because simply put, that makes the landlords have to find other ways in order to do their screening. So if you say, hey, we're going to not allow landlords to do tenant background checks anymore, criminal background checks, then landlords are going to be like, okay, well, we want to make sure that we have the best tenants in here. So what do we have to do? We're going to have to make sure that they have a really good job and that they have, a high security deposit. And, we're going to make the rents higher to, disqualify a lot of the lower end tenants who would normally be able to, find a place. So now they're going to make it so that people who are lower income are going to have a much, much harder time finding a rental house. So let's get into this article and see what it says. A recent Supreme Court ruling upholding the Fair Chance Housing Ordinance will make it harder for renters to get access to affordable housing. Despite the intent of the legislation to make it easier for renters to get access to housing, it will have the exact opposite effect. The law prevents landlords from doing a criminal background check on tenants prior to signing a rental agreement. This puts the landlord in a position where they are unable to determine if the renter is a good or potentially a bad tenant, affecting not just the landlord's rental property, but those of properties in the same area as the rental unit. Each renter situation is unique, and a failed background check doesn't necessarily mean a renter will be denied a rental, but it does allow the property owner to make an educated decision on the risk that is assumed for each renter in the property. And that's all we are asking, is allow us to make the decision when it comes to the background of a tenant, not the government, not some ridiculous legislation. Okay, allow the landlord to be able to make the tenant decision for who is going to be living in their property based upon their criteria. Okay, so if I get a tenant in my property and they are known for just causing problems, maybe they're a known thief, and I own multi-unit buildings, so I'm going to put a thief in next to my other tenants, and then they could possibly be stealing from my tenants? I don't think so. Or you could have a person who has a history of arson. Oh, would you want that person living in your property? I wouldn't. But when you have legislation in place that says you can't even do a background check, you can't properly screen these tenants, okay? And that means that you are going through other means to try to weed out the problem tenants, like just raising rents. Raising rents takes care of a huge number of bad tenants, and you might have to raise rents to cover the fact that you're going to be experiencing more damage and more bad tenants who end up not paying or causing problems in your units. So, yeah, it's making things worse. A background check that shows a renter has caused property damage or has been delinquent in paying rent in the past clearly is a higher risk tenant. It would also show if a tenant that has had a spotty rental history has worked to subsequently repair that history. Rents are likely to increase as property owners will want higher rents to mitigate the risk of a potentially bad renter. This cost will be passed on to all the renters, including the ones with excellent credit and rental histories who pay rent on time and don't damage the rental property. That's right, yeah, the higher costs of doing business are passed on to all the renters, not just the ones who have the spotty record, okay? So it ends up hurting all people who are renting these properties. That's why you go to these places and they have all these rental regulations in place, and the rents are just sky high because the cost of doing business as a landlord is so much higher because they have to follow all of those regulations. It's not that they are just being greedy, okay? And people don't understand this. They don't understand that being a landlord is a business, and I've covered that in a video as well. So, as soon as they start getting a better understanding of what we do, then maybe they wouldn't be pushing all of these ridiculous regulations onto us. Not having a perfect rental history or something in their past that could be a red flag for a property owner doesn't mean a landlord will not rent a property to the tenant if the risk can be mitigated. By banning background checks, landlords will no longer have the discretion to adjust the rental agreement to mitigate any additional potential cost. Background checks on renters should be allowed, which benefits both renter and property owner. And I 100% agree with that. Allow us to be able to pick out the best tenant, the ones that will work best in our properties, and the ones that we can, have the best chance of having success for. And we will have less evictions. Rents will be lower overall for all of our tenants because we don't have to, cover the cost of having bad tenants in our properties. So, yeah, I know that this isn't probably a popular opinion, but you know what? I'm out here and I'm representing the views of what landlords think. That's the truth, okay? We want to be given a fair chance to have the ability to make money with our properties. That's why we got into this business in the first place.